All right, hello and a very warm welcome to everyone to today's webinar about the Smart Lighting Program Mark II. My name is Ross McCurdy and I'm a street lighting project manager at Ironbark Sustainability and playing a key role in this program. Today's other presenters are Mr. Paul Brown, Managing Director of Ironbark Sustainability, and Alison Hawkins from MAV Procurement. Before we get started, I'll just cover off on a few housekeeping issues, since I know for many of you this will be your first webinar. Firstly, just note that only us, the presenters, can be heard during the presentation, so you will all be muted, and we'll leave it that way for the whole presentation. We plan to present for around 40 minutes, leaving around 20 minutes at the end for questions. However, we do encourage you to ask questions at any time during the webinar by typing them into your GoToWebinar question box. We'll try and answer as many as we can as we go along. However, depending on the number of questions, we might wait until the end to answer them. And if we don't have time today to answer all the questions, we'll certainly follow up with a call on those unanswered questions with people after the webinar. When you are asking questions, please try to be as specific and clear as possible with those questions. Note also that we're recording the webinar and we'll make it available on the Ironbark website, www.realaction.com.au, after the webinar. That's all the housekeeping, so I'll throw over to Paul Brown. Where do you go, Paul?
G'day everyone, and thanks for joining us. Although the first slide that you can see on screen talks about Victorian and Tasmanian Smart Lighting Program, it's important to note that a lot of the things that we're talking about today is relevant to any street lighting or smart lighting project you might be doing around the country, and we note that there are a number of people who are not from those states attending. Nonetheless, it's exciting to be talking about this program. This is Mark II. There has been a lot of work already done in both of these states around energy efficient LED lighting, and we're really now seeing an evolution of technology and an evolution on how to do these projects, which means we have a Mark II, which is exciting. All right, what are we going to talk about today? Firstly, we're going to talk about the program, what it is the scale of the opportunity for these two states and for the council, who is responsible for what, how are we going to integrate smart lighting, which is really one of the key technology changes that we've seen since the Mark I project, some more detail on the program in specifics, and then next steps for each council. For a number of you, several parts of this will be very familiar, and a lot of the program has already been rolled out, and the project management approach to it is very similar to other projects you might have delivered. So we're going to spend most of the time on the differences between Mark I and Mark II, so that you understand what are the new things you need to think about or consider when planning a project for your council. All right, before we go there, a number of you had pre-webinar questions, which are on the screen now. I've highlighted in bold the items which we've lifted out from that. So there was a number of questions about smart lighting. There was a lot of interest in V category or major road lighting. And there was also a lot of interest in the business case, the paybacks, where do we get funding, that sort of thing. So we've integrated most of those questions within the presentation. But again, if we haven't answered your specific question or if a bunch of others come up, please pop them into the question box. All right, let's talk about Mark I before we get to Mark II. The Mark I program in Victoria rolled out from around 2011 to 2017. It was the most successful local government energy efficiency program in Australia ever. To 300,000 lights, thereabout, over 2 million tonnes of greenhouse savings and over $500 million of ratepayers' money saved over a 20-year period. So awesome project, we're very pleased. However, there is more work to do. In Tasmania, there has also been a lot of activity So in Tasmania, there's around about 50,000 streetlights. So we've already seen around about 30% of those change to energy efficient LED lighting, which is saving around 15,000 tonnes and almost $4 million. So significant activity in Tasmania as well. And there are some substantive differences between Tasmania and any other state in terms of the level of control and ownership from lighting, which will also lead into what those councils can do around smart lighting, which we'll talk a little bit about further later on. Okay, what is the future opportunity? So we've combined both states in these slides. It's important to split major roads from minor roads. And from major roads, what we're talking about is any road which is either collector, arterial, or other main thoroughfare that is servicing highways, etc. You will know they are major roads typically by the type of light, and in general, they are sodium lights. So if you're driving around at night, a major road is, we would consider for the purpose of this project, as one with a yellow colour, which is a sodium. So in these two states, there's around about 200,000 of these lights left, so it's slightly less than the scope of previous projects. The tonnage saved is, again, almost 2 million tonnes, and over $600 million savings over 20 years. So major roads tend to be a bit more expensive to manage and maintain, so the savings from LEDs are higher. The payback period is something that a number of people have asked about. And if you see on the bottom left of the major roads opportunities slide there, the payback period is anywhere from 5 years to 11 years. Now that's a big range. That range is largely driven by the maintenance prices that the distributors are currently utilising for major road LEDs. One thing I will say about that is we are consistently seeing the gap between LED maintenance prices and old technology widening. So typically over time we would expect to see that payback period narrow and shorten. But right now there is actually a reasonable payback for all major road projects. In Victoria, in Tasmania, there is current analysis being done by TasNetworks around approving major road lights, and we would expect a similar project outcome on major roads. With minor roads, there is still significant opportunity in both Victoria and Tasmania. There's fairly chunky parts of the state that have not replaced any of their residential lights, but there are also a lot of legacy lights like decorative lights or lights that are in awkward spots to access, which will need to be replaced as well. The overall scope of minor road opportunities is much lower than major roads, but where councils are delivering any kind of project, it's a no-brainer to include these major road replacements as part of it. You'll notice the payback period for minor roads is better than major roads, and that's just due to the maturity and the confidence the distributors have in their pricing around that. All right, let's talk a little bit about the smart lighting program itself. These 5 steps that are on screen now is the same 5 steps as the previous project. There are some differences in terms of what is delivered as part of those projects. Before I talk about those differences, one thing it's important to note is that in Victoria and Tasmania, the procurement process and panels, which Alison will talk about in a short while, are now live and open to councils. In Tasmania, the appropriate process there is to talk to LGAT around accessing information about the panel. In Victoria, the entire program, so steps 1 to 5, is now live and open. In Tasmania, there is a current procurement process which is looking to try and make sure that program is open to Tasmanian councils, but that is not current. So in Tasmania, you can do step 4. In Victoria, it's all 5 steps right now. The intent is for that to be available across the board in the future. What's the difference between Mark 1 and Mark 2? In Mark 2, a very big focus of the work and the preparation stage, so 1, 2 and 3, is around smart lighting, and I will go into much more detail about that in a second, but it is particularly relevant for major road lighting. That includes not just the sensors on the lights themselves, but also the management systems and the integration into council's asset management processes. So the intent of the support program is really to help councils understand, decide where they're going to deliver, and then integrate smart lighting systems into their normal processes. The other thing that this Mark II program does is it covers all outdoor lights. So it is not just street lighting. It can also look at parks, pathways, sporting grounds, etc. And it is specifically designed so that councils can think about how they want to manage outdoor lighting and deliver projects. And the other component of it is, of course, looking at funding. Unfortunately, there isn't any significant funding in Tasmania currently for these projects, but in Victoria there is the Victorian Energy Upgrades Program, which is available currently and can be included in these projects and is standard as part of the support program. All right, we want to talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities around those steps, just so it's clear what it is and how councils can access and start delivering the program. Ironbark has been engaged on behalf of Victorian councils by MAV to deliver all of the main support elements. So if you have any initial queries or contacts, want to know how the program works, etc., you're best to contact us first. We'll also be working with scoping and advising on smart lighting. The thing about smart cities and smart lighting is there is a whole bunch of people who know a whole lot of stuff. And so we are definitely not the only people to be talking to. Key stakeholders include IT and smart technology providers within council. There's a whole lot of councils who have expertise within those councils, and also within distributors where some of the systems are being largely controlled by the distributors, so they're a key stakeholder as well. Obviously engaging with distributors and others as usual, and accessing relevant funding. All right, I'm going to pass over to Alison, who's going to talk a little bit about the procurement process and the role of MAV-LGAT, etc.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm the acting procurement manager for MAV Procurement, and I also ran the tender processes over the last 12 months for both contracts. Now, what we just want to let you know, with the RFT processes that we ran, you'll all have comfort that the processes actually help you comply with Section 186 of the Local Government Act, which means you can purchase under these contracts in excess of $150,000, and you know that you're going to comply. So there is great comfort there. So we actually ran two tenders. The first one that we ran, of course, was for project management services, of which Ironbark has been awarded the sole supply contract for. As we know, it's Mark II, so we've got continuation of expertise on that panel. The second process that we ran was for the lighting hardware. For those that are across Mark I, you'll know that the previous contract was actually just for hardware alone. This panel that we've actually established this time round now extends itself out to installation services as well. So that's a great win for this process. So now that we've got both hardware purchasing and we've also got installation services. Now, I do want to talk to you about something that's actually quite sensitive in the area, and it's in relation to access of contract and the pricing. Now, what we do need you to do if you want to access this contract, either the Ironbark or the hardware and the installation panel, we do need you to actually come through to the MAV and obtain access to both contracts. Now, when we say access, that's about us actually giving you authorization to look at these contracts through our procurement portal being vendor panel. Now, vendor panel is the repository for all our contracts and the pricing. It's closed. It's only open to anyone that has access. It cannot be seen by third parties, nor can it be seen by anyone outside of the local government sector. Now, when I say about commercially sensitive information, I'm talking primarily about the pricing. Now, in Mark 1, we did have a few interesting examples of where pricing was actually either deliberately or not deliberately shared to people that actually weren't key in the processes for replacement for their council. Now, what that means is, what we're trying to do here is make sure that the pricing remains commercially sensitive at all times. We will constantly reiterate that through the life of the program. The pricing is up on vendor panel. If anyone does want access to the pricing, I do need you to come through to MAV procurement and make sure that 1, you've got the right level of access, 2, you've got the right copy of the pricing, and 3, that we know who's actually accessing it on a regular basis. Now, when I say about the right pricing copy, I don't want you to assume that the pricing that you're looking at is always the most current, because there will be regular updates done to the pricing list. Now, that includes the products. So as you're aware, this panel is for those products that are approved by the distributor. If it's not approved or superseded, it needs to either be removed or only added into the price list schedule when it's approved, and we've got confirmation from Ironbark that the approval status has been achieved. So please do make sure that you come through to us for the pricing schedules at any time for the life of this program. We just have to constantly reiterate that the danger of having the sensitive information about pricing going outside of council or to competitors. So, you know, if you look at the panel, we have multiple suppliers on there. Of course, we want to protect each of our suppliers with the pricing that they've given. So don't want to bang on about that too much, but let me know if you've got any questions about that moving forward.
You're most welcome to bang on about it. These projects we've currently put on screen are probably worth somewhere between $100 and $200 million to manufacturers. And so the confidential nature of the pricing can't be overstated.
Absolutely. Now, there are multiple people in at MAV who will be able to help you. So if you send any emails through to the procurement@mav.asn.au inbox, we'll answer you within 24 hours, but I'm more than happy for people to come through directly to me. And I think that's about it.
No worries. And just to reiterate, for Tasmanian councils, any queries about the panel to direct through to LGAT. It's open now, and you can access all of that in both Victoria and Tasmania if you're the appropriate person in council.
That's correct.
All right, awesome. We are now going to talk a little bit about smart lighting because it's fun to talk about and relevant to these projects. We've talked to many of you about smart lighting before. However, just to recap, the key question that a lot of councils are asking themselves is, what is it that we want to achieve from a functionality perspective, and how much does it cost? And then obviously, what are the benefits? Up there are 10 specific areas of interest around benefits that councils have when thinking about smart lighting. I'm going to touch on just a couple of them today, but it's worth considering that there is a whole range of potential other outcomes, not just LED replacement from an old light. And smart lighting really starts to hone in on these other benefits and co-benefits from the project that can be achieved. All right, the first one I want to talk a little bit about is dimming and compliance. This example is from a specific project that we've been partnering with a Victorian council on. The purpose of a number of these pilots is really just to let's give this a crack, let's understand how to do these specific projects and integrate the benefits into a real project, and therefore understand what the paybacks, what the costs are, and what is the technical process you need to go through to make sure it can be integrated into the bulk change projects. So apologies for the smallness of the pictures, but essentially what these three pictures on the left are showing you. On the left is the current compliance level for a particular intersection. This is a major road location, and this is reasonably typical from what we've found. Red means non-compliant to Australian standards, category V. Green means it's compliant to V3, which is a quite high compliance level, and yellow means compliance to V5, which is a lower compliance level. When you replace, in this instance, to LEDs, you'll see that there's a lot more green areas, and there is more yellow and less red, which generally means that LED is going to be more compliant than the current lighting in this instance. One thing we found is very important to think about design and compliance at each location. What you find in one area does not necessarily apply everywhere else. And in residential projects, there is high level of certainty that you'll get a like for like or better lighting outcome. In major roads, there is not. So for major road projects, one of the most significant changes compared to a residential project is it's very important to do a compliance design. For Victorian councils, you actually need to have be analysing the compliance of the design to access the Victorian Energy Upgrades funding program as well. So there's multiple reasons why you might look at that design compliance. In any case, what this council then instructed us to do in the last figure, 20, is tell us how we get compliant across the board in these intersections. And that included adding lights and increasing the wattage of some lighting. We then went through a process of modelling, can we dim these lights and still be compliant? So V3 during peak periods where there's a lot of traffic, and V5 when it is non-peak, which is all allowed under the Australian standards. And the Australian standards actually essentially differentiate between lighting levels based on traffic volume, of which we have the data for these installations. Anyway, that's the background to this study. I want to talk a little bit about the results from this. And this was looking around about 300 lights in a whole bunch of major locations, roads. We found that smart lighting increased the capital cost by around 25%, and that includes increasing to compliance. So adding lights and increasing the wattage of certain lights to make sure there was a compliant installation in these locations. Compliance goes from around 80% to 100%, as mentioned. The energy savings actually increased. So a straight LED change in this pilot was going to save around about 60% of the energy. By putting in, installing compliance, even though you're adding more lights and doing dimming, we were increasing the energy savings overall from 60% to 70%. And the key question, which is what is the value of smart lighting? Looking at this one narrow slice of benefits, the paybacks just from this project was around about 10 to 12 years for that smart lighting component. So not including the LED change, just from smart lighting itself. That's quite exciting because what it's saying to us is that smart lighting added to a major road project makes sense. Again, I have to reiterate that this would be something that would need to be analysed on a location by location basis and is integrated into the projects. So this is a fairly standard part of a process. The next step in this particular project is working closely with council and the distribution business to understand how to technically deliver this outcome. So the theoretical design and the paybacks make sense. The next step is making sure the systems and the processes and the project management will deliver the outcome. So it's still watch this space, but nonetheless, it's very interesting results so far. The other project I want to talk a little bit about, just to give you a different angle on smart lighting, is a temperature project that we're looking at. The majority of smart PE cells that go into smart lights have temperature sensors on them. So that picture in the middle there where you've got a PE cell, that's which controls the lighting level, the smart P cells also have temperature sensors in them. This particular project is trying to identify, can we use that temperature information from a light, which will come standard, so there's no additional cost when we put in a smart light, and then use it for all sorts of other purposes like understanding the temperature of our streets, understanding how to design streetscapes, clarifying what are we doing a heat wave, which houses should we hit, and not hit rather, which houses should we visit, and to make sure that the elderly or the very young are safe during a heat wave. So, but nonetheless, this particular project is essentially looking at the correlation between the temperature in the light to the temperature on the ground. As you can see from this particular graph, the predicted temperature is the grey line and the actual is the orange. So we're getting very good correlation after doing some algorithms and calculations between what we're expecting the temperature on the ground to be based on the information in the light. This is early stages and there's still some process to go to make sure we're confident that temperature data can be used for this purpose. But the next step in the process is really focusing on what are the benefits, who within council or within community want to know this information, and therefore what is the cost benefit. So at this stage, the cost benefit from knowing temperature data is an unknown. But for example, if you can change the way you spend infrastructure so that it's more effective for communities, then there could be significant benefits from a cost perspective for that information. But that's the next step. We'll tell you about what we find with that when we find it.
Paul, before you go on, we've just had a question come through from Gary going a few slides back about dimming. The fact that these lights are unmetered, there's no cost saving because you can't measure the energy reduction. What can we say about that?
So for that particular example that we talked about earlier, we are working closely with the distributor to identify how we can pass through cost savings to council. There are various mechanisms by which council can do that currently. The federal government are also working on the approval of a new metering type, which means that things like these smart meters will essentially become an approved meter, which will resolve that issue. But in the interim, there are processes where customers and distributors can come to an agreement with the retailer around how to charge using for unmetered loads. And we're working that through with this particular project. But it's a good question. It's something that definitely needs to be resolved as part of the project. Okay, so this slide here is what we know currently based on a reasonable sized sample of street lights. And this is around the estimated economic benefit per light from smart lighting over 20 years, which is about the life of the lights. The first item, dimming, is something that we're expecting will flow through to council. So that's a cost saving that council will be able to achieve and therefore can drive council's business case. The maintenance line item is based on the actual charge and cost to councils for things like major road patrols and other asset management activities from distributors. You'll notice that maintenance only has a blue column, not a red column, and that means the blue column means what the high benefit might be, the red column is the low. The thing about smart lighting, it also costs more. So there is trade-offs in terms of maintenance pricing. When you need to replace that smart cell, it'll be more expensive than a dumb cell. So maintenance savings could be anywhere from something significant to nothing. So that's something we're working through in these projects itself. Day burners, actually, there is two columns there. It's a very minor opportunity. And obviously the big elephant in the room around smart lighting is currently traffic safety. So traffic safety is there because smart cells tell maintenance providers when they're not working or tell them when they're going to stop working in the future. And so that means that the lights can be repaired much quicker or in fact repaired before they fail. So the benefit from smart lighting around traffic safety is really just from that accelerated repair regime, and the purpose of lighting is traffic safety, largely. So this is directly driven from known information about the value of lighting in road safety and then the value of accidents. We actually got some data on how the federal government put a value on people's lives, for example, which is not something nice to talk about, but nonetheless, there is a way to economically value all these different things. Obviously, the major beneficiary on traffic safety is the community and the state government who largely fund the health system. So for smart lighting, the majority of these benefits are actually going to flow through not to councils. And obviously there's a whole bunch of other areas, the temperature sensing, voltage, which I won't mention now, but I'm happy to talk to people about voltage, which we haven't quantified yet what the savings might be. All of this is exploratory information, so councils can start thinking through whether they want to include smart lighting or not, and also so that we can continue to collect different case studies and build this bank of knowledge around the economic benefit and also how to deliver. So this is an ongoing discussion, and each time we talk, we'll update on wherever things are at around smart lighting. All right, let's jump through to what should my council be doing when we're talking about LED changes. We've talked about this the 5 steps in the smart lighting program. I'm just going to quickly whip through them so that you understand a little bit more what happens in each step. The preparation stage is really gathering information relevant to your specific council, including information on pricing from your distributor and obviously information from the main roads authorities around how they're funding these projects or charging for them and what sort of technical approvals there are on lights, etc. The information from the panels we've already heard about are integrated into this step. The purpose of this step is really to put information in front of your council so you can understand the costs and benefits and process to deliver these projects. So cash flow graphs, for example. But the main focus is putting in front of your council enough information so you can make a decision. This can include things like presenting. This is an example of Ross, who you heard earlier, talking to a group of Central Victorian councils last week around the project and how it works. So this part of the support program, it's the base level of doing a business case report, but it can extend to any other support you require to brief your council or get things happening. Funding, we've already talked a little bit about the Victorian Energy Upgrade, which is a live funding stream currently. That is funding around about 5 to 10% of project costs and comes in after the project is completed. So you still need to budget for the full capital cost, but you're creating certificates at the same time, which you can then sell after the project's finished. There are a number of other funding areas, schemes like the local government funding vehicle through MAV. Roads to Recovery is a program that was utilised by Launceston Council when they delivered their Mark 1 project and is a program funding that's available to councils. Typically, councils have a very long list of road maintenance projects they've already identified as part of that program. But nonetheless, it can be used for this project. The Tasmanian government recently have provided low or no interest loans to councils. That was for a very short period of time and is not currently a live program. However, who knows, maybe they'll update that. And a number of councils have accessed that program as part of street lighting upgrades. And then obviously, for a good project, either within council or external financing is a really common way to fund these. Our major focus on all of this is access what funding you can and make sure it's an awesome project, and then the rest will take care of itself. I'll briefly talk about main roads and what they're doing. In Victoria, the recent return of the Labor government means that we might have some more certainty around funding from VicRoads. Obviously, for main roads, there are various levels of cost share or co-funding, and we saw the slide earlier which talked about the benefits of smart lighting flowing through to the health system. In Tasmania, that's a process that we still need to work through to talk to the Tasmanian government and Department of State Growth around relevant funding for either smart lighting or for main roads projects. All right, the defined stages, what we're really talking about there is detailed feasibility and design. It's really looking at which specific lights are we talking about and including in this project. What are the functionality we're including? The communication side of it, how do we want to manage that? It's in order to put councils in the driving seat and obviously also put down on paper the standard project management outcomes that council is seeking from the project. Each project will have a project plan, which includes a whole bunch of different bits and pieces, which are reasonably standard. The thing that's new is really just honing in on that design and smart lighting component, which we've already mentioned. Communications is a really big part of this and will be integrated into that process too. From a design perspective, it's reasonably common actually for councils to engage with external stakeholders like police. And certainly if it's for main roads, engaging with state main roads authorities as well. But often it's also just internal teams, traffic management, community safety, etc., and working through a series of design questions about how councils want to manage certain locations. In major roads, as mentioned, there will need to be a specific design for each major location, and that is really just driven out of managing risks, but also making sure you're integrating the best possible outcomes from the project from a design and smart lighting perspective. Again, the scope of all of this is for council to choose, and all the things I'm saying is what we would strongly recommend. This typically will look at things like public transport links, traffic accidents, is there external funding for other bits and pieces? All right, now, procurement process, we have heard a fair bit about this already today, so I'm just going to skim out over this. The purpose of this is getting the best price, and it can involve the tender panel, so for materials, but from a labour contractor perspective, each distributor is different, and so it's best to talk to us about what the relevant process is depending on your geographic area. So that will vary depending on where you are. What we have found in Mark 1 is this has a significant impact on capital costs, and that has certainly flowed through to the new program. And in Mark 1 of the program, that was around about 15 to 30% of capital cost reduction, which is significant when you're talking a $100 to $200 million project. And obviously that drives down the business case, the paybacks, and makes everything better. The last step around management is actually the easiest if you have done all of the other steps effectively. You get what you plan for, and the management side of it is, there's certainly a whole lot of things in terms of keeping contractors to account, managing timelines, etc., which take a lot of work, but it's a standard and quite straightforward process once you've already developed and delivered the other aspects of the project. All right, I'm just going to step back briefly now. For any given council thinking about how do we engage with this program or where we need to go next, the most relevant step for any council who haven't yet done an updated business case covering all the lights that are left is to do that. So get a business case done, so that then you can start having the conversation with your council around the scope of the program and how to deliver it. So we would recommend over the next 6 to 18 months, councils do that. We would strongly recommend councils be thinking about implementing over the next 3 to 4 years. And there's reasons for that, which I'll go into in a sec. The other thing it's worth noting is there are already around 37 councils utilising the program since October. And that's been from a soft start. This is the official launch of the program, but you can see there is a pent-up interest in getting these projects moving and delivered. So strongly recommend councils getting on board. It's awesome. All right, so why are we talking the next 4 years? I briefly wanted to talk about the types of lights that are out there. This screenshot is essentially saying, here are all of the lights in Australia and their types from, and this is based on 2016 data. T8s, fluorescent T8s and low pressure sodiums are already gone effectively from a lamp supply perspective. Mercury vapor, we are seeing the writing on the wall from both international regulation and the actual supply of lamps. And we're expecting to see them drop off a cliff in the next 2 to 3 years. For CSLs and metal halides, it's starting to get difficult to get these lamps now. And certainly by 2023 or thereabouts, the cost or the ability to source these lamps will be very limited. T5s and high pressure sodiums are actually the most common lamps in the world. And so they have a bit longer to go. The reason all this is happening is because of regulation, but also because of demand. So we're seeing factories closing all over the world producing lamps because everyone is going to LEDs. And they are not, the sourcing of lamps has dropped off a cliff. So the commercial ability to access, to maintain the current lighting is going to be significantly reduced. And the impact on councils and distributors of this will be that costs will go up. You'll still be able to get a replacement globe for a whole lot of these things, but it could be 4 times the cost of what it currently is. And the supply is certainly going to be much smaller. So the volume you'll be able to get, the number of manufacturers and the number of suppliers supplying these lamps is already reducing significantly. So that is why we're encouraging councils to be active around how this works over the next 3 to 4 years. Certainly by 2030, there'll be almost none of the current lights in the streets. And that'll either get replaced by councils in your control, or it will be replaced by distributors, and you'll bear the consequences of that cost. All right, next steps. There is already an expression of interest, which has gone out in our newsletters. It's on the screen there. So if you're interested in delivering the project or want to know more about it, please just jump online and register interest, and we're happy to follow up and have a chat about it. And that's all from me. Ross, do we have any awesome and exciting questions?
We do. We've had another one come through from Gary. Thanks, Gary, who's asking in relation to business cases and funding from Vic Roads. When are we going to hear more from Vic Roads? What's the time frame on that?
That is, of course, the question for Vic Roads. Councils have been asking Vic Roads for several years to fund their cost share portion of the major road lights. Vic Roads have been actively pursuing that question within government. As mentioned, the return of the Labor government means that we're confident that we'll get some movement over the next 2 or 3 months. But I'm definitely not promising what Vic Roads might do, because we will see. But we'll definitely keep everyone informed around the timing of that. As mentioned, there are a couple of live projects currently, which councils are delivering on, and key parts of those projects include direct conversations and workshops with Vic Roads to get all this sorted out.
Great, thanks, Paul. Another question from another Paul. Do Category B lights use visors to prevent light splash or spill in the same way that Cat P lights do? Is there more or less likelihood of resident complaints when you're doing a Category B program compared to a Category P?
Probably less likely. So from a road number perspective, major roads, you're talking 20 to 30% of streets. So purely from a volume of residents who could be affected, it'll be lower. The light output from a major road light is higher, much higher than residential streets. So in those 20 to 30% areas, depending on the street, whether it's a commercial area or a residential area, then the light output will be higher, but those residents will be used to that higher light output. The major difference between the residential and major road light project from a visual amenity perspective is we're going from an orange light to a white light. So first project will tell us a lot more, but certainly there's a lot of areas like freeways and arterials where there aren't a lot of residents in those locations.
Great. Another question, and this is a really high-level question. What physically makes a light smart compared to the lights that went in during the Mark 1 program and the ones that we'll see installed in the Mark 2 program? What's the physical difference?
Well, so smart light is in the cell itself, or like some smart lights don't actually have a PE cell, it's just integrated into the light. There is a NIC, a communication device, which enables that light to communicate to a communication network. And then that communication network can then go to the software on your computer, and you can either manipulate the light by dimming up or down. It can tell you information about the light in terms of faults or energy use, etc. So the main difference from a light perspective is just having that smart control unit that's installed at the same time. The light itself is the same. It's just the control device, which is typically included within the PE cell, which is a removable component.
Great. Keep your questions coming through, people. Thanks. These are great. We've got one from, who's this come from? I think I can't read the name. It's fallen off the screen. But what are the ongoing software costs likely to be when we're talking smart lighting?
So there's a whole range of commercial offers, and so the ongoing software cost is a spectrum question, and it's really about what the overall smart communication network software, etc., that you're accessing, and it also comes down to a question of, is council using or driving that software, or is it something that you're utilising the distributor's software? So these are the things that we are currently exploring as part of the pilot. So it's a broad-ranging answer. I'm not going to talk about specific numbers in this.
Great. Got a question from Andy in Horsham. G'day, Andy. How are you going? What life are we expecting from a Cat B light?
So the lights that are approved in Victoria and that they're looking at approval on in Tasmania have a nominal life of 20 years.
Excellent. If you do have any more questions, we've got maybe another 10 minutes there, so feel free to fire them at us using the question function in GoToWebinar. We'll just flip to this last slide for now, which is about key contacts. So if you are in Victoria and you are interested in learning more about the program, key person contact is myself, so Ross, and you can see my details on the screen there, phone number and email address. The contact at Ironbark for interested Tasmanian councils is my colleague Hannah Snape, and you can see her contact details there as well. Paul, of course, is always around and available for help and assistance, and his contact details are there. So this would be your first port, these names here are your first port of call if you've got any questions. I can't see any more questions popping up. One that's come up in the past, Paul, is in relation to decoratives, because that's a potentially tricky area to tackle. So if the council has a number of post-op decoratives or major road decoratives, what are their options at the moment?
So there's a number of options for all of these areas. It does come down to what particular lights are approved by each distributor. And there are a number of distributors currently looking at LED lamps that can be retrofitted into some of these particularly tricky light types. I know that some councils, for example, have for post-tops, which is there's a low level of approval of decorative post-op options generally. Some councils have actually put on an additional bracket so that they can put a standard light on those. So there's a whole bunch of different options around delivering decorative lights, and typically they are included. So the consideration of that is included in business cases, and then what council wants to do and how to deliver it is included in that detailed preparation and design process.
Great. Okay, final question that's come through is, we've got more coming through, so that's great, keep them coming. We have an old business case which doesn't look at smart lighting at all. Should we be getting it updated to look at that option?
Listen, so the graph that we had on screen, which showed the benefits of smart lighting, the traffic safety column, etc., is one which is appropriate to use if you're putting something up to council. And noting on the dimming slide, it said capital costs are around 25% more for smart lighting. So if you already have a business case that's been done in the last 12 months, then we think that would be appropriate to use. The smart lighting is not really the driver of whether you do another business case or not. The LGAT and MAV panel is more important to your business case than the smart lighting information. And that panel is quite recent. So if you've got a business case that is, 9 months old, we would recommend an update based on the new information from that panel.
Yep, great. This looks like more of a comment rather than a question from Andy. Living in the land of top entry non-standard 150 watt HPS luminaires. So it sounds like that's on Andy's radar as a challenge to tackle.
As always, happy to chat, Andy.
And Andy again, thanks Andy, keep them coming. Does dimming equate to reduced energy usage? We touched on this before.
Yeah, so the key thing to keep in mind is if you're dimming the lighting levels, it's not a direct, so let's say you dim lighting levels by 50%, that is not a direct 50% reduction in energy. There is, depending on the particular light, you will actually get different levels of energy reduction depending on how much you're reducing it. But that's all integrated into the design process to quantify exactly what the energy reduction is.
Great. Okay. We haven't got any more questions, and it's about 11:53. So don't forget that you can send follow-up questions through to us at any time. We're more than happy to answer them. But we'll wrap things up here. Can I say a special thanks to Paul and also Alison for presenting today. And a big thank you to all of you who attended. Looks like we had around, I saw close to 30 at some point. A few have already knocked off, but that's great. I hope you have found the conversation valuable. As mentioned at the start, we'll follow up unanswered questions with people over the next few days. We'll make a recording of the webinar available on our website. That's www.realaction.com.au, and we'll send out a notification email to everyone when that becomes available. But otherwise, thank you very much for attending, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon.